Every day the dog sat on the empty hospital bed, and nobody at the hospital understood why at first. The bed had been empty ever since the first day he had come in, but still, the dog just kept returning to it for hours on end. But then, a nurse finally discovers the shocking reason for the dog's behavior. Nurse Mildred ran towards the empty hospital room with tears streaming down her face. She still had her phone pressed against her face, and the person on the other end of the line was waiting in great anticipation if she was going to be able to find the dog. Of course, he was in the empty room. And when Mildred saw the animal, she could finally respond to the person on the other end of the line that it was okay. She could come here now, and they could sort everything out. Mildred sat down next to the dog and started petting the animal. Now she finally understood his mysterious reasons. But what did the dog sit next to the empty hospital bed every day? Why did Nurse Mildred have such an emotional reaction, and what was the dog even doing at the hospital? It was such a rare thing for a hospital to allow animals on their premises. As it is for most hospitals, so it was for the hospital in North Dakota. But the narrative changed one day as they had to bend the unspoken rule for one particular furry gentleman. The gentleman's reason must have been very tangible for the management of the hospital to agree with his terms. About 6 months ago, a black Labrador dog showed up at the hospital in North Dakota. Most people who sighted the dog at first thought it was most likely for one of the patients or a guest. So they didn't give much thought to the dog's presence at the hospital. But, surprisingly, after some time, nobody claimed to own the animal. When it seemed like the owner of the dog was not at the hospital, they decided to kick the dog out back on the street. Their decision was based on the fact that they considered that patient could be at infection risk by the presence of the dog. The people in the waiting room didn't take the decision well, as they were glad to play with the puppy. All the people in the waiting room were happy to interact with the jolly black Labrador. This includes the people in severe pain, those who were a bit ill, plus the loved ones that came to the hospital with their sick friends or family member. Surprisingly enough, some nurses also fell in love with the animal. The people in the waiting room took it upon themselves to plead with the CEO of the hospital not to send the dog back on the street. They stated that the dog's presence was serving to boost patients' morale. The CEO wanted to object at first, but after having a first-hand experience of seeing the dog play, he couldn't say no. After the CEO agreed to the people's plea, the first thing done was to take the dog to the vet. The animal was thoroughly checked by the vet to confirm if its presence could have potential risks. The vet doctor concluded doing the full checkup once a month will help any infection to a minimum. At the end of the checkup, and nothing risky was found in the dog, the black Labrador became a full-time resident of the hospital. Not long after, the dog was named Joy. He was so called because joy was the feeling he was giving everyone that came across him at the hospital. Waiting patients were always overjoyed to give the animal all the necessary walks. As a result, the staff never bothered to walk him. The most pleasing of all things was that the health and safety inspectors at the hospital were able to tolerate the dog's presence. Thus, freedom was there for the black Labrador. Everything seemed perfect with the stray black dog's relationship with the hospital. There was the only thing that some of the staff viewed as odd about the whole thing. As much as they were enjoying the dog's company, they couldn't keep their minds from thinking about the only thing that was off. The staff of the hospital had trouble keeping track of the dog at all times. They've been facing the same issue since the dog arrived at the hospital. They felt there was always a period each day when the dog seemed to disappear. The period of disappearance always seemed short, but it was something they found strange. After a while of doing nothing about the strange disappearance of the dog at that time of the day, they got more curious and decided to look into the situation. It took them about a few weeks of stalking the dog before they found out what they were looking for. On that fateful day, a patient unknowingly gave them the answer they were searching for. That day, a young boy whose mother was being attended to was waiting for his mother to leave the surgical room. While waiting, he became nervous and sad at the same. Incidentally, he saw Joy in the waiting room, and as usual, the animal transformed the gloomy atmosphere into a cheerful one by its presence. Since the dog cheered him up, the young boy didn't hesitate to follow the dog around. Even when the dog left the waiting room, the boy kept following it. After some minutes, the boy's father noticed he was nowhere to be found. He didn't realize that the boy had Joy all the way into one of the hospital rooms. At the boy's disappearance, the father had to inform the staff. Immediately after the report was made, the staff and every available person began to look around for him. While searching, they all kept hoping nothing terrible had happened to him. Fortunately, they found him within minutes. The search party found the boy waiting in the hospital room for Joy. At that point, Joy was found sitting calmly by the side of an empty hospital bed. The dog's position caught the staff by surprise as they had no idea what he was doing there. For some minutes, they were left with so many thoughts that they almost forgot what brought them there. After a few minutes of being distracted, they called themselves to order and took the boy to his father, while Joy found his back to the waiting room. The next day after the incident, the black dog went disappeared again for a short time. This time, one of the nurses, out of curiosity, decided to check where it was. While the curious nurse was searching, she checked the hospital room where Joy and the young boy had been found the day before. To her greatest surprise, she met Joy sitting in the same spot, looking at the empty hospital bed. The nurse's discovery that day ascertained to the staff that the dog was always in the empty hospital room whenever he disappeared. The discovery of where Joy was always going for a short while every day confused the entire hospital. It left them wondering why it was one particular hospital room. The fact that the hospital room had been empty for a while, being one of the few substandard rooms in the hospital, made the situation more confusing. It had occurred to the hospital management severally to renovate the empty room, but there was no money. The entire hospital staff was confused about the situation because none of the staff could guess the motive behind Joy's going to the room daily. Since they didn't know the mystery behind the dogs going into the room, they decided to keep him out of the room for a while. They did this to check if they could break the habit. After the empty room was locked, the staff were surprised to see Joy walk away daily to sit in front of the closed door and whimper. Since the habit seemed unbreakable, the hospital decided to keep the door open for the dog. They did this because they felt the dog's action wasn't disrupting the running of the hospital. After all the drama, most of the staff concluded that going to the empty was what Joy liked and no strings were attached to it. But one nurse felt there was more to his going to the empty room. The nurse was so curious about the reason behind the dog's action that he started investigating the situation. The doctor, Mildred, couldn't believe that the only reason Joy visited the room with the toilet was that she liked it. So the doctor went to investigate. She first asked her colleagues if they saw the dog doing crazy things, but no one had seen the dog at all. She soon found out that there was more to it. Joy was indeed going to the toilet of the room in question every day. But what she was doing there puzzled Mildred. She had never seen anything like this before, and certainly not with a dog. Every time Joy walked into the restroom, she went to smell the auxiliary rods that hung next to the restroom. These rods help patients keep their balance while showering and going to the toilet. Joy kept sniffing it. Joy kept sniffing the rods. But what Mildred found even more bizarre is that after sniffing them, she made a strange sound, a kind of squeaking. It looked like the dog was sad or she was crying. Why is she acting so strange? Mildred wondered. Joy stayed in the toilet for about 10 minutes every day. She ended those 10 minutes with loud barking and a kind of crying. Then she jumped directly onto the empty hospital bed. What the dog was doing there puzzled Mildred to no end. Every time Joy arrived at the bed, she went, just like in the toilet, to smell the skeleton of the bed. Why is Joy acting so strange? Thought Mildred. She decides to do some research on her own. She had to finish work first, but then she would be able to begin her research. That same evening, Mildred skips her evening routine of working out, making dinner and watching TV. She quickly orders something to eat from the local snack bar and does a quick wash, and then gets behind her laptop. She doesn't know what terms to search for on Google, but she uses the words dog and strange crying sounds. She does not immediately get the result she is hoping for, so she continues her search. A few minutes later, she has a hit. At one point, she stumbles upon a news article about a woman with a dog. Apparently, this dog has been acting weird since her husband passed away. This does look a lot like Joy's behavior. Is this happening to Joy as well? The next day, Mildred arrives at the hospital. She immediately walks to the room where Joy always sits. Just like the past few weeks, Joy is sitting in her spot again next to the empty bed. Mildred is not only a nurse. She used to do forensic training and didn't finish, but she gained enough knowledge to conduct a trace investigation. She has a suspicion that the dog is picking up a certain scent, probably from its owner. She goes over the frame of the hospital bed that Joy always sits next to with a tissue. She does the same to the auxiliary bars in the toilet. Then she takes the wipes to the hospital lab. At the lab, she asks one of the lab technicians if he will analyze the smells and/or DNA from the tissues as soon as possible. The man says he will finish what he is working on and then immediately start examining the wipes. Mildred leaves her number so he can call her. Mildred continues with her normal work, but in her mind she thinks only of the wipes and what kind of result the lab technician comes up with. She can't wait for the results from the lab. Then she gets a call on her work mobile. Hello, this is Michael, the lab technician. I have the results of the sample from the wipes. We were able to match the DNA to a person. I think you'll want to know who it belongs to, and more importantly, who owns the dog in the hospital. Mildred's heart begins to beat harder. She can't wait to hear what Michael has to say. Of course, I want to know, she shouts loudly through the phone. Michael responds smiling and says, Calm down, I'll tell you right away. We compared the DNA to the DNA we have in our database. After about half an hour, we had a match. It's from an 88-year-old man named Jonathan de Sanchez. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital here and he died last month. So she is right after all, Mildred thinks. Then her suspicions turn out to be true after all. She asks Michael if he can send her all the man's details to her work email. Michael does so immediately, and Mildred begins going through the data. It turns out that the man died on April 22nd of this year. Mildred wants to look for family members so she can deliver joy to them. Jonathan turns out to have lived on a farm for years. She decides to drive there herself. It is about an hour's drive to the farm. When she gets there, everything seems deserted. She knocks on the door. After a minute, someone opens the door. It is a middle-aged woman who has opened the front door. Who are you? The woman asks. Mildred explains that a dog has been walking around her hospital for weeks. She explains that she has been investigating and has found out that the dog probably belongs to Jonathan who lived at this address. You've got to be kidding me, the woman shouts. Jonathan is my father. We looked after him for the last few weeks before he was taken to hospital. Because we were in the hospital so much at the time, we didn't get to watch his dog as much. Probably Max, that's really the dog's name, picked up a scent from Jonathan and followed it. He followed the scent all by himself and ended up at the hospital. But by that time, Jonathan had already died. Max stayed in the hospital and found his owner's deathbed. The animal is so loyal that he walked to the same room every day. Now Mildred also understands why the dog was making those strange noises. He was crying for his owner. Mildred tells Jonathan's daughter that she can ride with her to get the dog. The woman says she would rather drive behind her. Together, they drive to the hospital. Mildred gets tears in her eyes when she sees how Max reacts to the presence of Jonathan's daughter. Waggling, the dog jumps up to her. Mildred has never seen anything so loving. The woman thanks Mildred for everything and together with the dog she walks out.